during the evidence.
The attorneys will not intentionally misrepresent or misstate the evidence, but as advocates, they may have had a different view than you. Remember, you're the only fact finders in this case. So if you heard or saw something differently from an attorney, rely upon your own individual determination. Sometimes jurors ask during the deliberations, may we have read back a particular attorney's argument, or may we have a PowerPoint or a chart that's presented during argument. Ladies and gentlemen, if it's not in evidence, you don't get it. So please be aware of that. If you want to take notes, by all means take notes during argument, but recognize that the argument phase simply is not evidence. The people have an opportunity to present an opening argument. The defense, if it wishes, may present its argument. And if the defense presents an argument, the people have a second argument called a closing or rebuttal argument. That is because the people have the burden of proof. After the parties have presented to you their arguments, I'll give you the concluding series of instructions. Thank you. At this time, Mr. Walgren, on behalf of the people, do you wish to present your opening argument?
Please, Your Honor.
You may. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Let me begin by, and I think I extend this from all the parties and everyone involved in this trial, just first thank each and every one of you for your service in this case, for being an extremely, by all accounts, punctual, diligent, and attentive jury. All the parties appreciate it, and all the parties would ask that you just hang on a bit longer while we get through this last phase of the trial. As the court indicated, this is a closing argument, and it gives us an opportunity to go through the evidence that you've heard, to apply that evidence to the law, and to present the case in a final summation. You've heard from, I believe, 49 witnesses. You've been presented with 330 plus exhibits throughout the case, extending weeks, multiple items of evidence, multiple witnesses, and a great deal of evidence to consider. At the end of the day, however, and as I spoke to you about during voir dire, this case will come down to whether or not you believe Conrad Murray acted with gross negligence or criminal negligence in his treatment of Michael Jackson. It'll come down to whether or not you believe he was a substantial factor in Michael Jackson's death. He need not be the only factor. He need not be the only cause. He only need be a substantial factor, which is defined as something more than trivial and more than remote. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence in this case is overwhelming. The evidence in this case is abundantly clear that Conrad Murray acted with criminal negligence, that Conrad Murray caused the death of Michael Jackson, that Conrad Murray left Prince, Paris, and Blanket without a father. For them, this case doesn't end today or tomorrow or the next day. For Michael's children, this case will go on forever because they do not have a father. They do not have a father because of the actions of Conrad Murray. Now, what this is fundamentally about is trust. Trust between a doctor and a patient. We've heard a great deal about the doctor-patient relationship. This hallowed relationship, this special, historic relationship, where a patient relies on a doctor's best medical judgment, where a doctor is assumed and is entrusted to provide the best medical care, to do no harm to his patient. And that a doctor will use that best medical judgment and provide that best medical care regardless of the requests of the patient. Because a doctor has a legal duty, an ethical duty, to do no harm. A doctor has a duty to his patient. And from each and every doctor that you heard from in this trial, whether called by the people or the defense, you heard that if a request was made to provide medical treatment that could cause harm, that doctor in the end would have to say no and walk away. The doctor is the decision maker. The doctor is the one entrusted with the medical knowledge. The doctor is the one in the relationship who at the end of the day makes the decision as to what is proper medical care and what is in the well-being of the patient. You've heard from many doctors in this case who told you that if they were presented with this situation, they would absolutely say no and walk away. Not only did you hear about that in a hypothetical sense, but you heard from specific doctors called by the defense who were presented with such a request and said no and walked away. Because they believe and acted in accordance with their belief that a doctor has an obligation, a solemn obligation, to first do no harm to their patient. Conrad Murray violated that sacred trust each and every day. Each and every day, Conrad Murray violated that sacred trust premised on that hallowed relationship between a doctor and a patient. It was an employer-employee relationship. Conrad Murray sought payment for services rendered. Services rendered being the provision of Propofol to Michael Jackson in his bedroom on an almost nightly basis for over 2 months, according to Conrad Murray's own words. For services rendered, not for proper medical care, not for the sake of doing no harm, but an employee-employer relationship for services rendered. This relationship of trust that is so important between a doctor and a patient was grossly corrupted by the actions of Conrad Murray. Michael Jackson trusted Conrad Murray. He trusted him with his life. He trusted him with his own individual life and the future lives of his children, trusting that Conrad Murray, as Michael slept, would care for him so that in the morning he would awake to share a meal with his children. But Conrad Murray corrupted that relationship, and for that, Michael Jackson paid with his life. We know that on June 24th, 2009, Michael Jackson performed at the Staples Center and by all counts gave a great performance. He was optimistic, he was looking toward the future, and you've seen live footage of him dancing and singing and performing and doing what he loved to do. We know from the date this image was taken on June 24, 2009, that in about 12 short hours, Michael Jackson lay in his bed, palms up, head tilted to the side, dead in his bedroom at 100 North Carrollwood. We know during this time frame, June 24, 2009, what Michael was doing. He was rehearsing, he was practicing, he was preparing for one of the biggest tours of his career. And we know now from hearing all the evidence in this case about his outlook on the future. what he planned to do, what he planned for his family, what he planned for his business future. We know he was optimistic. Was he anxious about the tour? Absolutely certain he was. He's a 50-year-old man embarking on one of the biggest tours of his career, 50 sold-out shows at the O2 Arena in London. Who wouldn't be anxious about that? He wanted to satisfy his fans, his family, his children. He was a creative genius and a perfectionist, and he went about these tasks striving for perfection, striving to perform at the top of his level, striving to satisfy the fans that had been so loyal to him for so many years. And he wanted perfection, and he wanted to be the best. And despite any normal anxieties he may have had about that endeavor, he was optimistic, he was excited, he was looking to the future. We know October 2008 that he had relayed to Randy Phillips. If you recall, they were at the Bel Air Hotel before Michael had moved into 100 North Carrollwood. The children were there running around in Halloween masks and costumes, playing, and that's how one of the reasons Randy Phillips remembered that it was October, because it was near Halloween. And Michael had expressed that he didn't want to be a vagabond anymore. He'd been traveling. He wanted to buy a nice house for his children. He wanted to settle down. He was looking toward the future. He was making plans, long-term plans, for both himself and his 3 children to whom he was so dedicated. We learned about the tour and what Michael hoped to accomplish with this tour and why it was important to him. Kenny Ortega told us how this environmental message of Michael's had always been so important, and it resonated through his songs, not just his own personal beliefs, but his messages to the public, to the lyrics in his songs, and this was profoundly important to him. And he wanted to share this message. He wanted to express this voice throughout this tour. He wanted to repay his fans, and again, do a top-level performance in gratitude to his fans for all their years of loyalty and support. And probably most importantly, he wanted to do it for his children, who had not seen their father put on such a performance. And he wanted them to come see what he does so well. He wanted his children to see what he spent his whole life doing. Being creative, being a performer, being an entertainer. He wanted his children to experience that. And that was one of the foundations for his desire to go forward with this tour. We know his children were paramount to him. One of the things he'd expressed to Randy Phillips that part of the contractual, the deal they had, he wanted a large estate in London while the tour took place, because he didn't want the children to be cooped up in a hotel room. He didn't want the family to be trapped in a hotel surrounded by paparazzi. So he wanted a large estate with streams and horses and animals, so his kids could lead as normal a life as possible while this tour unfolded. We knew about his future plans to make movies. He wanted to make a feature-length film based on the song Thriller in the video Thriller. He discussed other movies. He wanted to get into directing. He had plans. He had hopes. He had dreams, as we all do, both for himself and his family. We heard about his desire to open a children's hospital. We heard this not only from the drugged recording of May 10th, 2009 at 9:05 in the morning, but in Conrad Murray's own statement to the police, he comments that Michael wanted to create this children's hospital, to give this to the world. That Conrad Murray said he was hoping, or he had been asked to be the medical director of this children's hospital. Michael had plans and hopes and dreams. We knew also that the tour was discussed. It had been discussed that the tour, following this successful leg in London, these 50 shows, there was hope that it would expand across the world, go through the United States. Again, there were plans and dreams and hopes that were very well known to those around Michael Jackson during this time. But we also know, as we heard from multiple witnesses, that what was paramount to Michael were his 3 children. And his dreams and hopes were intertwined with those same dreams and hopes that he aspired for his 3 kids. One of the reasons he was so excited about the tour, if you recall, was because it was going to be beginning that summer. And the kids, relieved from the obligations of school, would be able to accompany him and go on the tour and see their dad perform in London. But none of this came to be. None of these dreams, hopes, aspirations, or desires came to be, because on June 25th, 2009, Michael Jackson, just 50 years old, was pronounced dead. We know and we will discuss the circumstances of that death. We know and will discuss how Paris had to come in and see her father in that condition and scream out, "Daddy," as she broke down in tears. How Prince had a shocked face, shocked look on his face, and was crying. That's what the actions of Conrad Murray did. Not just to Michael Jackson, but to his children. Ladies and gentlemen, the defendant is charged with one single count of involuntary manslaughter for the criminal negligence that was exhibited and caused the death of Michael Jackson. I want to talk to you briefly about the law and the applicability of the law in this case. The law as it relates to involuntary manslaughter. And I want you to remember, if you look back, whenever it was, 6 weeks ago or thereabouts, when I stood in this very well, and we were going through voir dire, and I discussed with each and every one of you. I said, you may have unanswered questions at the end of this trial. There may be 100 questions, and maybe 97 of them are left unanswered. But under the law, you need only answer just 3. I asked each and every one of you, are you the type of juror that could do that? Are you the type of juror that could follow the law, recognize that you have an extremely important role, but also a limited role, to answer the questions presented by the law? And I asked you, in all candor, are you the type of juror that would just be frustrated? You need to answer everything or you cannot reach a verdict. And each and every one of you assured me that you would be able to follow the law, determine the facts, apply the law, and answer what needs to be answered under the law. And should that mean that you leave here with unanswered questions, you would still be able to fulfill your obligation. Now, involuntary manslaughter, as the court read to you, there are 2 separate theories. And the reason there are 2 separate theories in this unique case is because Conrad Murray, the defendant, is a medical doctor. And as an everyday, for lack of a better word, civilian, you are liable under involuntary manslaughter for acts of gross negligence. As a doctor, however, the law recognizes this special relationship. And the law states that a doctor has a legal duty of care, such that If a doctor fails to act, a doctor is also criminally liable under involuntary manslaughter. So where a non-doctor may not be liable under that theory, a doctor is recognized by the law as having this additional obligation to have a legal duty of care to his patient, and that a failure to act, a failure to live up to that legal duty of care also subjects the person to criminal liability under involuntary manslaughter. So the law states that a defendant committed a lawful act but acted with criminal negligence, and the defendant's act caused, in other words, was a substantial factor in the death of Michael Jackson. The act being that the defendant, a licensed physician, administered Propofol, and the surrounding criminal negligence in the administration of that Propofol. But that is the act that inevitably led to the death of Michael Jackson. Now, as a legal doctor, the defendant has a legal duty to Michael Jackson and failed to perform that legal duty. The failure to perform the legal duty was criminally negligent, and his failure to perform that legal duty caused, again, substantial factor, it need only be more than trivial or remote, caused the death of Michael Jackson. And that is because a physician who has assumed the responsibility to treat and care for a patient has a legal duty to treat and care for that patient. Criminal negligence. A person acts with criminal negligence when he acts in a reckless way that creates a high risk of death or great bodily injury. And a reasonable person would have known that acting in that way would create such a risk. In other words, a person acts with criminal negligence when the way he acts is so far different from the way an ordinarily careful person would act in the same situation, that his act amounts to a disregard for human life or an indifference to the consequences of that act. Now that is criminal negligence. What criminal negligence is not is an intentional desire to kill. It is not an intentional desire to cause harm. No one has sought to prove that Conrad Murray sought to kill Michael Jackson. This is a criminal negligence theory, that he acted so recklessly with the life of Michael Jackson in his hands that it amounts to indifference to the very life of Michael Jackson. Causation. An act or failure to perform a legal duty causes death if the death is the direct, natural, and probable consequence of the act or failure to perform a legal duty, and the death would not have happened without the act or failure to perform the legal duty. A natural and probable consequence is one that a reasonable person would know is likely to happen if nothing unusual intervenes. An act or failure to perform a legal duty causes death only if it is a substantial factor in causing the death. And here again the definition. A substantial factor is more than a trivial or remote factor. However, it does not have to be the only factor that causes death. Conrad Murray's actions need only rise to more than a trivial or remote factor in causing the death of Michael Jackson for there to be criminal liability under involuntary manslaughter. Now you've heard throughout the trial, through the defense opening statements, through the defense medical expert, Dr. White, that their theory to date is that Michael Jackson injected himself with Propofol, causing his own death. Well, the law accounts for this scenario as well. And what this is called under the law is independent intervening cause. Now, to relieve a defendant of criminal liability, An intervening cause must be unforeseeable and an extraordinary occurrence. Defendant remains criminally liable for the death if the possible consequence might reasonably have been contemplated, or the defendant should have foreseen the possibility of the harm of the kind that could result from his act. We will talk about this more, but you need only go to defendant Conrad Murray's own statement, where he states his own belief and knowledge that Michael Jackson liked to push Propofol himself, that he liked to do it himself. You take Conrad Murray's own statements and you cannot, under any rational interpretation of the facts, conclude, if you believe that theory, that it was unforeseeable or is not an expected consequence when the patient is left by himself, abandoned, with benzodiazepines and propofol running through his blood. If you believe that theory, Conrad Murray in his own words told you it was a foreseeable consequence and that he is guilty as a substantial factor in causing Michael Jackson's death. Another instruction of importance, the evaluation of the defendant's statements. If you find that the defendant made a false or misleading statement before this trial relating to the charged crime, knowing the statement was false or intending to mislead, that conduct, that false or misleading statement, may show he was aware of the guilt of his crime, and you may consider it in determining his guilt. The fact that Conrad Murray would not tell the paramedics that he administered Propofol and had been administering Propofol for over 2 months, a fact that Dr. White incredulously described as something that was overlooked, that is a false, misleading statement. That is consciousness of guilt. That is Conrad Murray knowing full well what caused Michael's death. That is Conrad Murray not putting the patient first. That is Conrad Murray putting Conrad Murray first. And that is consciousness of guilt, showing the defendant knew what had transpired. He knew of his guilt, and he was intentionally giving false and misleading statements. But as you well know, it didn't stop with the paramedics. He then continued with the emergency room doctors, never once mentioning Propofol, only mentioning lorazepam. These are false, intentionally false, misleading statements, when Conrad Murray, as you well know, was fully aware of what had transpired in that room, was fully aware of the information that he had an obligation as a doctor to share, and Conrad Murray failed to share that information. That is consciousness of guilt. Now, let's talk briefly about the background of this case and the background of what was going on at this time. And it will not be a lengthy discussion because I think all of you are quite familiar with the surrounding circumstances of this case and what was transpiring. But again, we know Conrad Murray had had signed an employment contract, the parties being AEG, Michael Jackson, and Conrad Murray. He had signed it, however, neither of the other parties had signed it. But we know what Conrad Murray expected to receive. What he expected to receive for his services was $150,000 a month, at least for the 10-month duration of the tour, and possibly longer. What he hoped to get for his services rendered was $150,000 a month. In a trip to London and housing in London, because again, this contract was written up and its sole purpose was for the tour, the desire of Michael Jackson to have Conrad Murray as his doctor on this tour in London. We know of Conrad Murray's intent, we know of his desire, as evidenced by the fact that he had already signed the contract, and as further evidence by the fact that he had already sent out letters to all of his patients telling them that he was taking a sabbatical because of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I had to make a most difficult decision to cease practice of medicine indefinitely. Indefinitely. This is the letter Conrad Murray sent out to his patients. He was ceasing medicine. He hit the lottery. He was going to get $150,000 a month. And he was taking it wherever it was going to take him. If it took him to Los Angeles, if it took him to London, this is what Conrad Murray was going to do. He sent out letters to all of his patients and said, I am ceasing the practice of medicine. Now, you've heard a lot about Propofol, and I just want to go over a couple things briefly. It's an intravenous sedative hypnotic. It's used for the induction and maintenance of anesthesia or sedation. You know where it's used, you know when it's used, and you know why it's used. What I want to talk about are the shipments and the quantity and the knowledge of Conrad Murray as these shipments continued. As these huge volumes of Propofol were being shipped and continued all throughout the months, including June of 2009. We know they were all shipped to Nicole Alvarez's apartment, not to a medical office, not to a medical clinic, as Conrad Murray had relayed to Tim Lopez, but to an apartment building, left to be signed for by Nicole Alvarez, whoever else may have picked up the package. But cases of Propofol, 10 count, 40 count, being shipped to the apartment of Nicole Alvarez, beginning in April through June. We know, April 6th, there were 10 100 milliliter vials. Those are the large ones. That's People's 30. This is the 100 milliliter vial. 10 of those shipped on April 6th. 25 of the smaller ones for a total of 5,000 milligrams. And April 28th, 40 of the large vials. 40 large ones, 25 of the small 20 milliliter vials. And again, as far back as April, he is getting lorazepam and midazolam. Keep that in mind when he talks about, Conrad Murray talks about in his interview that, I was trying to wean him off. So I started going toward lorazepam and midazolam and the benzodiazepines. April 30th, he is receiving 10 vials of lorazepam and 20 vials of midazolam. We then have the recording of May 10th, 2009, on which you hear the tragic, sad voice of Michael Jackson in some sort of drug-induced, slurred stupor. And you hear the voice of Conrad Murray, evidently seated right there as he recorded the conversation, the voice of Michael Jackson. May 10th, 2009. Again, think of this when Conrad Murray says in his interview, referring to the time period of June, that he began to think there was a problem. He began to want to wean him off. This is a month and a half prior to Michael's death. You've heard the recording and you have it in evidence to hear during deliberations if you so desire. It is sad recording. And for reasons unknown, it's made by Conrad Murray on his iPhone and kept on his iPhone by a doctor who will not keep a shred of medical records to be reviewed, by a doctor who could not provide one piece of medical record documenting his nearly 2 months of Propofol infusions. But yet, on his own personal iPhone, he records Michael Jackson's voice and keeps it. even in this state, even in this recording, with Michael at such a vulnerable state, he's talking about his plans for the future. Anything like this, referring to his show. It's amazing. He's the greatest entertainer in the world. Even in this state, as he lay in his bedroom with Conrad Murray evidently sitting right next to him, he's thinking about the future and putting on a great performance. But even more than that, he's talking about the Children's Hospital. The biggest in the world, the Michael Jackson's Children's Hospital. In this state, when he has no reason to believe anyone is even listening to him, when he has no reason to believe anyone will ever hear his words, when he has no reason to believe anyone would be documenting it in any way, in this vulnerable state, in his own house, in his own bedroom, he is talking about what he wants to do in the future. And he is talking about his desire to build the greatest children's hospital in the world. These are his true feelings. These are his true desires. This is what he's saying in a private, vulnerable moment of what he wants to do. And for reasons unknown, for reasons completely unknown and unexplained, Conrad Murray sits by his side and records him on his iPhone. And what do we know happens after May 10th, 2009? After hearing this voice, after hearing Michael Jackson in this condition, what does Conrad Murray do just 2 days later? May 12, 2009, he orders the largest shipment of Propofol, 40 of the 100 milliliter vials, 25 of the 20 milliliter vials, and 20 more vials of the benzodiazepine midazolam. Just 2 days after recording Michael Jackson in that state. From May 12th, we go to June 10th. Again, another shipment of 40 large vials. Now 50 of the 20 milliliter small vials. This is June 10th, 2009, 15 gin. When you consider the truthfulness of Conrad Murray's statements to the that on June 25th, 2009, he administered 25 milligrams, 2.5 cc in a 10 cc syringe. When we know from the shipment records that nearly 2,000 milligrams a day are being shipped. And you also know that multiple search warrants were executed in this case. At Conrad Murray's house, at his businesses, at storage facilities, at Nicole Alvarez's apartment. No other Propofol bottles were found. No other Propofol bottles were found. Now, what do we learn was happening then as it relates to Conrad Murray's knowledge? The knowledge of the devastation he's unleashing on Michael Jackson through this grossly negligent care. We know that in the first week of June, there's a meeting because there's concern about Michael's nutrition, his weight. And there's a meeting held. And Conrad Murray's at the meeting, and he assures everyone he'll take care of it. And by all accounts, everyone at the meeting is satisfied. It appeared Conrad Murray said he's going to take care of it. He's going to take care of it. They knew him to be the personal physician selected by Michael Jackson. He was a medical doctor. He's hearing what they're telling him, and he assures them that he will take care of it. Randy Phillips said it was obvious that Michael had great trust in Conrad Murray. Conrad Murray indicated to everyone there that Michael was in great health, a statement he made multiple times to multiple people. He told Kathy Jury, he told Kenny Ortega, he told Randy Phillips, he told Bob Taylor, the insurance broker, which we will talk about. On June 25th, he assured Bob Taylor that the media reports of any health concerns regarding Michael were not true. When Conrad Murray knew perfectly well there were health concerns. And Conrad Murray marched forward, putting Conrad Murray first, not Michael Jackson first. But this is during the first week of June. What do we know about June 19th? This was the night at the rehearsal when Kenny Ortega was startled. He was concerned about the condition of Michael. Michael had chills. He was trembling. He was rambling. Conditions we learned from Dr. Waldman, the defense expert, could relate to Demerol. They also could relate to benzodiazepines. We learned from the defense witness, Nurse Cheryl Lee, that she looked it up in the physician's desk reference, and these were symptoms ascribed and attributed to Propofol. But we know from Kenny Ortega that on June 19th, he was concerned. Michael didn't rehearse. He sat in the audience with Kenny for a period of time. He eventually asked if he could go home, and Kenny said, of course, and was taken and left early from the rehearsal. But we also know that Kenny Ortega did far more to express these concerns than Conrad Murray ever did. Because Kenny Ortega then wrote an email. And in that email to Randy Phillips, he shared his concerns, and you'll have this in evidence. But he shared his concerns of the condition of Michael on that evening. He said he needed to get help. He relayed that when it was occurring, he reached out to Conrad Murray but could not reach him. He tried to call him, but he was unable to reach him. But as a result of these concerns, we know on June 20th, there was another meeting at the Carrollwood residence. And at that meeting, we learned that Dr. Murray was upset that Michael had been sent home. Conrad Murray evidently did not appreciate Kenny Ortega getting involved in that aspect of the relationship between Conrad Murray and Michael Jackson. Conrad Murray sternly told Kenny Ortega to essentially mind his own business. Stop trying to be an amateur doctor and psychologist. Be the director and leave Michael's health to me. Unfortunately, that seems to be what happened. Conrad Murray further explained that Michael is physically and emotionally fine, and it should not be your concern. That was on June 20th, 2009. On June 21st, 2009, we learned that Michael was complaining of being hot and cold, different parts of his body. We know that Fahim Muhammad called telephone Nurse Lee, who was actually out of state, and explained to her what was taking place, and that she indicated Michael needed to be taken to the hospital. We also learned from Fahim Muhammad that Michael Amir Williams later contacted Conrad Murray, but we don't know what transpired. That was June 21st, 2009. Sunday, June 21st. We then go to Tuesday, June 23rd, where we know Michael performed and rehearsed at the Staples Center. By all accounts, it was a great performance. Michael again was looking toward the future. They were getting close to shipping out to London. Everyone was excited. Adrenaline was running high. The crew, everyone who had been working so hard on putting this tour together, they saw light at the end of the tunnel. And it was about to happen. This is it. The tour was about to happen. June 24th, 2009. Again, the last performance that Michael Jackson ever did. Again, by all accounts, it was tremendous. Everyone was excited. Everyone was optimistic that this was about to get off the ground and that all the work, all the dedication that had been put into putting this tour together, it was about to pay off and they were about to ship out to London. Michael was particularly excited. We heard from Kenny Ortega regarding Michael's love for magic and illusions. And they had talked about it. That tomorrow being June 25th, 2009, the illusion would be ready. And Kenny Ortega described it as flames coming up and this illusion where evidently Michael Jackson would appear out of nowhere. And Michael had a great love and fondness for this type of theatrical presentation. And he was excited about the next day to have this illusion finally be unwrapped. Kenny and Michael talked. Michael said he was very happy. He wanted Kenny to thank everybody and tell them that he loved them. He told Kenny, "I love you." Kenny said, "I love you too," and they hugged and parted ways. Randy Phillips was also at that rehearsal. And he described walking down the hallway with Michael. Michael put his hands on his shoulders and said to Randy, "You got me here, now I'm ready. I can take it from here." They hugged, and that was the last time Randy saw Michael Jackson alive. This was in the subterranean garage of the Staples Center at the conclusion of the rehearsal. And again, that was the last time he saw him alive. June 25th, 100 North Carolwood. You know the house inside and out. This is the front door depicting the glass doors through which you can see into the house. The front foyer area showing both the upstairs banister as well as looking straight through the house, which would to the right be the kitchen, and then going straight to the backyard. The stairs here to the left where the security personnel would often leave gifts and things from the fans prior to Michael retiring to his bedroom to meet up with Conrad Murray. You know the bedroom where Michael Jackson met his demise. You know the walk-in large bedroom-sized closet adjacent to the bedroom. The restroom where you see Michael Jackson's orange-lined bomber jacket that he was wearing when he performed Earth's Song just 12 hours earlier, or rather when he discarded on the bathroom floor probably just an hour or so earlier. His pants bundled up in a ball on the floor from coming home from rehearsal, showering, and proceeding to be given drugs by Conrad Murray. So what is Conrad Murray's version of events? We know what his version of events was on June 25th, 2009. We know that from the paramedics and the UCLA personnel. Michael was dehydrated, he was tired, and he gave him lorazepam to help him sleep. And he witnessed the arrest. That's a medical term. What that means is you observe the person go down. Dr. Cooper talked about that. Other doctors talked about it. A witnessed arrest means just that. You witnessed the arrest. Well, that's Conrad Murray's version of June 25th. But of course, that version changed. Conrad Murray, from June 25th to June 27th, during that time, the police did not have contact with him. I think his attorneys say in the interview that they had instructed him not to return calls or something of that nature. You have the transcript and the recording. arrangement was made. I believe an attorney of Conrad Murray had called and an arrangement was made to interview the defendant on June 27, 2009 at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Marina del Rey. And you know from the recording and from the transcript that Conrad Murray was there, represented by his attorneys, Mr. Pena and Mr. Chernoff, that Detective Smith and Detective Martinez were there, and of course the defendant, Conrad Murray, was there. And at this stage of the investigation, the police knew very little. They did not have autopsy findings. They did not have toxicology findings. And as you know, the cause of death was not discovered until the toxicology findings were completed and disclosed. What they did know on June 25th is there was no sign of trauma, there was no obvious wounds, nothing to indicate any type of violent death by the hand of another. So they were essentially working in the dark. They were trying to gather information, they were awaiting toxicology reports, they were awaiting findings by the autopsy, by the coroner's office, and they sat down to listen to Conrad Murray, to listen to what he had to say, in the presence of both his lawyers. The detectives were not medically sophisticated. They did not know the terminology. They probably didn't know the proper follow-up questions. They sat, they listened, they asked questions, and they recorded what Conrad Murray chose to tell them on that day. And what we learned is that he was the personal physician to Michael Jackson, who was going to be going on the tour, that the recent care and treatment had began a little over 2 months prior to Michael Jackson's death, that he spent the night at Michael Jackson's house at least 6 nights a week, and that his purpose was to put Michael Jackson to sleep. The detectives asked, when they learned about these nightly doses of Propofol, how frequently were these taking place? And Conrad Murray says, in response to the question, more than 10 times? Yes. More than 20 times? 30 days a month, roughly, every day. Those are Conrad Murray's words. He describes that he would give a bolus dose followed by a drip. He describes when he says that on June 25th he gave only 25 milligrams, that he typically gave more, but he gave half of that because of all the benzodiazepines on board. So he describes giving 50 milligram bolus doses followed by a drip in all the nights preceding. But for the night Michael died, and evidently just the night before, or maybe 2 nights before. But again, you have to evaluate Conrad Murray's statement in light of all the evidence as to what weight you give and how much truthfulness you find in these statements. But this is what Conrad Murray told the police on June 27th. Bolus doses followed by a drip. And then he describes a chronology of events of that very night. The IV in the leg to hydrate. The 10 milligram Valium pill sometime after 1 a.m., an oral pill. Said it was slow to act and Jackson needed to sleep. 2 a.m. he gives lorazepam, again according to Conrad Murray. This is intravenous lorazepam. According to Conrad Murray, Jackson remained awake for at least an hour, until 3 a.m., when for some reason Conrad Murray switches to midazolam. Again, 2 milligrams given intravenously. The only time Conrad Murray claims Michael slept was this about 12 minutes after the 3 a.m. midazolam injection. During this whole entire evening, according to Conrad Murray, this is the only time Michael Jackson slept, for about 12 minutes following the 3 a.m. midazolam injection. But at 3:20 he's awake, and he describes this continuing until 4:30 a.m.
So he was awake. It was 4:30 in the morning, and he was wide awake. And then he complained, I got to sleep, Dr. Conrad. I have these rehearsals to perform. I must be ready for
So this is at 4:30 a.m. And Conrad Murray is saying that Michael's complaining. He's complaining that he can't sleep. He needs to sleep or he'll have to cancel. Michael is complaining. Those are Conrad Murray's words at 4:30 in the morning. So according to Conrad Murray, at 5 a.m., he gives 2 milligrams of lorazepam. At 7:30 a.m., he gives another 2 milligrams of midazolam. And again, as you go through the statement of Conrad Murray, Michael's still complaining. He's awake. Conrad Murray keeps saying he's complaining, that he cannot sleep, and that at 7:30 a.m. there's still no effect. Pieces together as you go through the evidence with Dr. White hypothesizing that at 7 a.m. Michael Jackson swallowed potentially 16 milligrams of lorazepam. Setting aside the fact that there's no science to discern whether Conrad Murray gave oral lorazepam pills or Michael Jackson swallowed them himself, setting aside that absolute complete speculation, if you accepted Dr. White's theory, at 7 a.m. Michael Jackson had just taken 16 milligrams of lorazepam. At 7:30 a.m. there's still no effect, and as you go through Conrad Murray's statement, there's no effect throughout. At 10 a.m., Jackson requests Propofol. And now this is very important. At 10 a.m., according to Conrad Murray, Michael Jackson says he needs the milk, that it's the only thing that will allow him to sleep, and he needs the milk. And Conrad Murray comments on this in his interview.
I said, if you got Propofol now, which of course you should drink the milk, how much time, how much sleep you expect to have? You need to be up. What is it in you? And he said, this need is here, this is not advice. I don't know about your rehearsals, and I still go through the day. He said, I can't function if I don't sleep. They have to cancel it, and I don't know how to cancel it, but they will have to cancel it. So, I agreed at that time. And I would switch over to the Propofol.
Now think about that comment and that statement of Conrad Murray and what it reveals about Conrad Murray's intent. It's a very telling statement. His own words are that this is after 10 a.m. and he wants Propofol. And Conrad Murray is not concerned, well, I'm going to give you 25 milligrams that will cause you to sleep for 5 or 7 minutes. Conrad Murray is concerned that he needs to be up no later than noon. If this is shortly after 10 a.m., that's potentially 2 hours into the future, and Conrad Murray's concerned, well, what about you need to be up at noon? Not 5 to 7 minutes from now, noon. Having that concern in mind, it is only after Michael Jackson says, well, they'll have to cancel it. Because clearly what Michael Jackson is requesting and clearly what Conrad Murray is intending on giving, if you believe this statement, is something that will cause him to sleep far past 12 o'clock. So it's only after Michael Jackson says they'll have to cancel it. In other words, I don't need to be up at noon. I can sleep past noon. That is when Conrad Murray says, so I agreed at that time that I would switch over to the Propofol. Only after it had been agreed that the rehearsal would be canceled, Michael would not need to be up at noon. That shows what was taking place. Not an intent to put him in a light sleep for 5 minutes, but an intent, as Nurse Lee said, to knock him out. If you believe he was even awake at this time and not already knocked out as a result of the propofol being given by Conrad Murray. So at 10:40 a.m., according to Conrad Murray, in response to that dialogue that the rehearsal will be canceled, he doesn't need to be up at noon, he then wants you to believe that he just gave 25 milligrams diluted with lidocaine, enough that would put him down for about 5 to 7 minutes or thereabout. Slowly infused, Jackson goes to sleep. Following the administration of propofol,
for long enough period that I felt comfortable. Then I needed to go to the bathroom. So I got up, went to the bathroom to release my